Let's do this. The Cult of Hockey podcast by the faithful and for the faithful. I'm David Staples of the Edmonton Journal, and I'm here today with Bruce McCurdy. Welcome, Bruce.
Hey, David.
Draft day.
Draft day 2.
Draft day
Nuts
2.
and bolts of the hockey world.
The Edmonton Oilers had their most Eurocentric draft ever in team history. 5 out of the 6 players taken played minor hockey. They're not all playing in Europe now, but played most of their hockey, all their developmental hockey in Europe, including first round draft pick Philip Broberg, I think is how they say it in Sweden, if I'm not mistaken. And so 5 out of 6. The closest the Oilers have come to that. There's only been twice when even the majority of players, Bruce, were Europeans in the Oilers draft history. In 2011, 5 out of 9 players were Euros. And in 1993, 6 out of 11. So only twice before. And usually it's like 1 out of 5, 3 out of 7, 2 out of 6.
Right.
And as you go back in time, it was more North American heavy, mainly because Czechs and Russians were behind the Iron Curtain earlier on, and it made no sense to draft them as there was very little chance they'd come out. Of course, European hockey has also gotten stronger over time compared to Canadian hockey. So very Eurocentric. Bruce, do you think it has anything to do with Ken Holland or not?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
He's got a long history in both Sweden and Russia, and I think the Oilers, they've tinkered with Russia in the past, but they've been burned so often that they were really starting to back off from it, I thought, the last couple of years. But Holland went there with both feet today, drafting 2 players from Craig McTavish's Yaroslavl Locomotive team. Of course, the Swedish connection is long established. And I just think Detroit in general has long had a team that was very high on skilled European players, and just maybe a higher blend of Euros to North Americans than many teams. So I'm assuming that Holland's influence was part of that.
So, Bruce, there was a little bit of heat, including from me. Like I was hoping that the Oilers would, if they were going to draft Broberg or one of the many forwards available, there seemed to be about 12 to 13 players at the top of the draft, and I was hoping the Oilers could move down. And there was quite a bit of complaining and belly aching on the Twitter Oilers net.
Now there's a surprise.
There's a surprise, indeed, about the Oilers not trading down to take Broberg. And I had that same thought. I admit I had that same thought. A little bit like, why didn't you just trade down? But coupled with, well, maybe you can't trade down if that's the guy you want. But that thought really was dispelled for me, Bruce, when I looked at the first round. And people are basing this notion that Broberg, that the Oilers should have traded down to get him, based on the kind of the consensus of the publicly available draft list by all these draft experts. And they tended to hit, the average for them, they had him 13th overall. From TSN's Bob McKenzie and the Hockey News and the Athletic, Corey Prodman and Scott Wheeler, all these, 16 draft experts that I could find that, credible ones that make public lists. He was 13th overall. So people are thinking, why don't you drop a few spots? But here's the fact of the matter, Bruce. In the first round alone, there was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 players who there was a wider variance between where they were taken and where the public experts had them. Like, so for instance, Nolan Foote, who Tampa took at 27th, the public experts, they had him the consensus was he was 51st. You say, why didn't they drop down?
Well, clearly Tampa doesn't know what they're doing.
Simon Holmstrom, the Islanders, he dropped. There's a 21 spot difference. With Broberg, it was just 5 spot difference. Lassie Thompson, who was taken by the Senators, 17 spot difference. Ryan Johnson, taken by the Buffalo Sabres, a 14 spot difference. John Beecher, taken by the Boston Bruins, 11 spot difference. Moritz Seider, taken by Detroit, a 11 spot difference, and on it goes. So the difference with Broberg and where the consensus was actually quite small compared to a lot of these players. But none of these other teams with this huge variance were able to drop down to take these players. So clearly, there's a couple things going on. First of all, it's maybe not that easy to drop down, and
Yeah.
second, the public lists might be getting it wrong on average. The consensus, yeah. I mean, that's the obvious. That's the other thing.
There was only one trade. Arizona moved up from 14 to 11 to pick Victor Soderstrom, a player they may well have gotten at number 14. And Philly dropped down 3, and maybe they got the guy they wanted anyway. I haven't heard any verbal from Philly, but they got Cam York, a D-man from the U.S. National Development Team. So, and that was the only trade down that happened. And I mean, you have to trade down. There's only a few spots you can go. Like, you're not going to trade from 8 to 28 and still get Philip Broberg. You might go from 8 to 12 and get him, but you got to find a trade partner in there.
So what I'm going to say, Bruce, on this is, if we hear in coming years, well, the Oilers, Broberg, it was an okay pick, but they should have dropped down and got another pick. That's fake news. That's not real. You're living in a fantasy land if you think that's easy to do or that commonly happens. That's really not common at all. Teams are always going against the public consensus and taking picks either well below it or well above it. And the notion. So if anyone, like, in coming years, we're going to see it for sure. We're already seeing it, but I'm just saying that's not a valid criticism. It's phony baloney stuff.
I know from 40 years now of experience in fantasy drafts that you can rank a player where you think you're going to be able to get him, but it just takes one who also liked the same player you do, and he's gone. And once he's gone, he's gone. So, I mean, obviously the Oilers like Broberg. I mean, obviously Detroit liked Moritz Seider. Why didn't they trade down? Well, maybe they couldn't find a trading partner. So they just decided, okay, we got the player we like. He may be rated lower than this, but this is our one pick. We're either going to get him or not get him with this pick, and we're going to get him.
And maybe they thought, Ken Holland. Maybe he really wants Moritz Seider more than any other defenseman, or maybe Vancouver's.
Maybe he was in Holland's safe in Detroit. They found a list with Moritz Seider's name at the top. Who knows?
You figure Holland must have taken the list over from Detroit. They must have had 2 draft lists, essentially, the Oilers this year. They didn't have Detroit's final list, but they would have had a pretty advanced list. And I mean, he was the GM. He had that list. So the Oilers had 2 lists. How could even if Holland didn't bring the list itself, it would be in his head, right?
Yeah, he'd have the knowledge. And he was. I mean, the surprising part possibly with Ken Holland was that he was so close and saw many, many games apparently this year of the U.S. National Development Team that had just a ton of draft picks, like 6 in the top 15 that were selected from the U.S. National Development Team. And so if there's any thought that Holland might be biased in a particular direction, it might have been that way. And maybe a little surprising that he didn't take, for instance, 7 of the top 15. Trevor Zegras, who went next to Anaheim. And that he was a player that had a lot of people hot about him, about us Oilers not getting him.
You know who wasn't hot was our friend Sean Patrick Ryan at the Oil Night, who had seen these players. And he never was a Zegras fan. Because he just thought he plays a kind of a clever fancy game that's not going to translate well in the NHL to power hockey at the NHL level, which I thought was an interesting critique. So, but I agree, that's really a key point. And again, Ken Holland saw Cole. He saw Cole. What is it? Cole Caulfield? Is that his name?
Caulfield, yeah.
Caulfield, and he saw Matthew Boldy, and he saw all these strong attacking players, and chances are about half those. If there's 6 really good forwards on that U.S. team, about half of them are going to be really good NHL players, but about half of them aren't. And maybe he thought it's Turcotte and Jack Hughes are gone by the time the Oilers are drafting, and maybe Holland's thinking, well, there's a couple other guys that are not bad, but this Broberg is a way better bet. So that's obviously what he thought, that Broberg was a better bet. So that's why the Oilers took him, because they weren't drafting for positional need there. This was clearly who they thought was the best player available. Because if you look at positional need, you're taking a forward.
Yeah, and that's the knock that people have, is that the Oilers had an aching need at forward, and they didn't address it in the first round. And they got another left defenseman, of which they have a number in the pipeline ahead of Broberg, and almost all accounts suggest this guy is at least 2 years away from being part of the equation over here, and maybe 3 or 4 years away from being an impactful part of it. So why didn't he address the problem? Well, it turned out that he did, with the high pick in the second round, where they wound up getting a very good, highly ranked forward. So that solves the pain a little bit for those of us who are wanting them to pick a hotshot forward. Well, guess what? They did.
And it's interesting. So the player Raphael Lavoie, there's a guy on Twitter, the Don. He's going to be super happy because he was hoping they might take him with their first overall pick. I think the Don.
Really?
Okay. So excited about this player. So he's a great 6'4", 200-pound attacker from the Quebec League, who just came alive and took his team basically on his back, hauled his team to the Memorial Cup and finals. Was he on the winning team? I don't know.
He was on the losing team in the finals, and they were also the losing team in the Q finals. They went all the way to the finals. But they were guaranteed a spot in the Memorial Cup anyway, but that didn't stop Lavoie from potting 20 goals in 23 playoff games. Like, he really caught fire. So that has to be, when you have a 6'4" guy that has apparently a nose for the net and also is a dangerous shooter from range. Well, it sounds like he's got a few weapons at his disposal.
So it's 2 years in a row, Bruce. The Oilers have drafted. I think McLeod was the 40th overall pick. Yep. Ryan McLeod last year. This was 38th overall. And both McLeod and Raphael Lavoie were rated much more highly by the consensus experts. I think McLeod was in kind of like the mid. People saw him going between about 20 and 25 in the draft.
Right.
And Lavoie averaged out at 19th in the draft. And Steve Korianis, the draft analyst, had him as high as 13th. Out of the 16 draft public draft guy experts that I looked at, Bruce, 3 of them had Raphael Lavoie higher than Philip Broberg. So, in any case, it's the same kind of player who's been very highly rated on the public lists, who has fallen to the Oilers. The interesting thing, Bruce, is how excited we all get. And this is about fan psychology and my own psychology, because I was at that point, I was really hoping, like, as that pick was coming up, I was really hoping that the Oilers would get Raphael Lavoie.
Right.
He's so
we talked about him last night.
But the interesting thing is, it's kind of a weird psychology if you think about it, because what do the public experts know that the real experts don't know? So the real experts are having their say in the draft itself. The people who see way more games and are have way more acumen at rating players than anybody else on earth, and they're saying to this player, no, no, no. And every time they say no to the player, we're getting more excited about the player because we think he's going to fall to us. But the experts are weighing in and saying, nah, he's not really all that. But by the time he comes to us, we're like, yippee, we got the guy. It's kind of a funny dynamic in a way. That's my only point.
What's really funny is that players rise and fall. Their stock rises and falls in the draft. But for your stock to rise in the draft, you need one team to believe in you and say, we want that guy, we're picking him. And that's Moritz Seider or that's Philip Broberg. Whereas for a guy to fall, you need a consensus of team after team to say, no, we don't want him. So it's a whole different dynamic between the two phenomena.
Suddenly the screen got all fuzzy at your end. Is there something? All right. Anyway. Yeah, it's like selling a house. You just need one buyer, right? But after buyer after buyer after buyer says no to that house, you think maybe there's something wrong with that house. It was looking pretty good there for a while, but maybe there's something with the foundation that we haven't quite that our inspector missed. Anyway, this is no comment on Raphael Lavoie. Like the Oilers they said they had him higher on their own list. They were very excited to get this particular player.
Oh, yes, of course.
So
they always say that.
Well, it's always true.
It's always true. Yeah, I mean, even if all the guys on your list have been picked in order, the worst you can have is the guy at the same number that will be at the top of your list when it's your turn. And if any other team has gone off the board a little bit, then that guy is going to be up. The top guy is going to be ahead of where he goes to you. So it's just a mathematical certainty.
Yeah, and some of the public lists that I'm talking about, of course, like Bob McKenzie's list, they're based on the scouts, what the scouts
That's
are
a
saying.
scouting list. Yeah, that's a for real list. And some of these ones, I mean, these are serious people that are compiling this stuff.
Oh yeah.
And so it's when you say public, I mean, to me, there's kind of a couple levels of it, and there's one level, fan opinion that people sort of get all caught up in this player or that player based on something they've read or heard or some highlight that they've seen or what have you. Whereas if you're saying Bob McKenzie's list or Corey Pronman's list or something
Craig
like
Butt
that,
and
these
Sam
are
Cosentino.
these are people that put their life into this stuff, so they're going to be reasonably close. But
yes,
they aren't choosing 4 teams; they're just kind of trying to rate the skills of the players against each other, and of course, it's not an exact science. It never has been.
Yeah. So it's pretty. I was excited with this pick. I've never seen the player play. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I noted that when he was in the U18 tournament a year ago, he was scored 5 goals in 5 games for Team Canada.
Mm-hmm.
Who did Detroit get 30th overall last year? Joe Velino. Joe Velino only had 3 assists in 5 games on that same team. Joe Velino's kind of a similar player who really fell in last year's draft.
Yeah, sure did.
And so our man Raphael is like kind of the Joe Velino, Ryan McLeod, and there's all kinds of examples in every draft where these guys are falling. But it's kind of cool to have such a highly touted prospect available then, and hopefully.
Well, it feels like a second first round pick.
Sure did. Yeah.
When you have a guy, I mean, he was consistently between like 14 and 21. It's not like he was 30 or 28. He was in the middle of the first round almost everywhere. So, for whatever reason, certainly as on the raw talent scale, he surely has first round talent. Now, the knock on the guy that I've heard is that his work ethic may need work. I mean, we'll see.
He's taken at a point in the draft where about 1 in 5 players become good NHLers. So,
well, let's hope he's one of them. A big right-hand shooting right wing boy. Would that ever look good on the Oilers if it was the right player with that bringing that physical package?
Okay, let's talk about the next pick, Bruce, of the Oilers, and that was 85th overall. The Oilers take a Russian goalie who's going to be 21 soon. His name is Ilya Konovalov. And my reaction when I heard that they had taken a Russian goalie, I thought, what the frack? I was just disheartened. And again, it's completely irrational. Like that was my visceral reaction, but it is completely irrational. And so why do I say that? It's because, I thought, the Oilers have all these young goalies, and they do have a lot of young goalies.
They do.
So why are they taking a goalie? And then there was still some players who were fairly highly rated left that they could have drafted at that point, that other people were really wanted to see drafted, like other Oilers fans who were really into the draft wanted to see drafted. So I was kind of hoping for those players, again, irrationally, I think. But it was mainly like, don't we have enough goalies?
Yeah.
But I have to say, Bob Green's explanation was pretty darn solid. I mean, the thing that really won me over to the pick, though, was this guy was the rookie of the year in the KHL. As soon as I heard that, I thought, oh. And then he's got 2 years left on his deal. He's not even over here for 2 more years. They'll have now 2 full years to look at Wells, Skinner, and Rodrigue and see if any of those guys have it or not. So he's not even in the running for 2 years. And maybe not one of those guys, other guys pan out. And goalie's such a key position. They're going to have this other guy in the wings who's looks like a hell of a young goalie. Looks like he's at least as good a prospect as those other guys right now. So I don't mind the pick.
Yeah, my initial reaction was very similar to yours. In fact, I came into this weekend thinking man, the Oilers better not pick any more goalies this year. That's an old goalie. It kind of pains me to say that. But, man, this is 6 years in a row they picked a goalie. And that doesn't include Shane Starrett, who they signed as a free agent. It doesn't include Hayden Hockey, who they traded a pick for last year to get his rights and then didn't sign him because they had too many goalies. So at that point, you're thinking, what in the hell are they doing picking another goalie? But and my initial reaction on Twitter was similar to that. But as soon as I had a little chance to look into what the guy was and see what his situation was, which is, as you described, 2 more years in the KHL and one excellent rookie season and a pretty darn good 7-game trial the previous year when he was 156 goals against average, 933 save percentage. And last year, 189 goals against average, 930 save percentage over a full year. And he got 10 different honors: goaltender of the week, goaltender of the month, rookie of the month, that kind of stuff over the course of the year. So this guy was bringing his game all year long by the looks of what information we have at our disposal. So, I mean, he's 2 years. You can kind of forget about the guy for 2 years, but 2 years from now, he could be very close to a finished product that's ready to come in and play at a high level. So it's good that he's developing somewhere else, because Oilers got too many goalies in their own system to add another one would just choke off there's just not enough crease to share among 8 goalies or whatever it is.
There is not. And so it's a good thing he's going to be playing for Craig McTavish in Yaroslavel. And so there you go. Anyway,
well, that's
like
actually a good thing too, in that I think McTavish will be a guy for, not necessarily coaching goalies, but for a little bit communicating expectations to the guy. This is what you can expect in North America. This is what you can expect in Edmonton. I'll have a little bit more focus of your future. If your future takes to the NHL, I can talk to you about that. And also that I would assume still that McTavish and the Oilers would have a strong line of communication. It's not like the guy is going to disappear behind an iron curtain and we never hear anything about him, right?
He's still certainly good friends with Kevin Lowe, for instance,
and Bob Green, and probably Keith Gretzky, and I would imagine that the organization wouldn't have any trouble getting out information from the loquacious Craig McTavish.
So, Bruce, let's just quickly go over the last 3 guys taken. The 100th overall, Matej Blumel, 62nd overall, Thomas Majura, and 193rd overall, Maxim Denizhikin. Blumel and Majura are both Czech players currently in the United States playing hockey. Are they not?
And they're best buddies, apparently. Yeah, and they're both over here. They've been over here for a couple of years, and they're both taking the NC2A route and are long-term 2 to 4 year projects before they'll be in the system. But they're on the reserve list, and they both have posted decent offensive numbers that suggest that there's some skill involved in both players, and skilled forwards, which is really all 3 of the bottom picks, is the area of weakness that the Oilers just really needed to address at this draft.
Yeah, and so Denizhikin is in his draft year. He has a pro contract for 2 years. So again, he's going to be playing for in Yaroslavel, maybe on their pro team or maybe on their junior team for the next 2 years. So he's a long-term guy. So just and Bob Green addressed this, saying that he wanted just players that long-term, have someone else develop them, see how they go, draft and develop, see how it works out, and watch them. And maybe one of them will become a really good hockey player. Chances are that's not the case if you go by the averages, but every individual can defy the averages, and it happens all the time in hockey. So what do you think overall, Bruce? First draft of the Ken Holland era. It's like, what is it, the 5th draft of the Bob Green era and the 3rd draft of the Gretzky era. So you got a lot going on there.
They picked a lot of mature players. Philip Broberg, who turns 18 next week, is by 9 months the oldest player of anybody that they picked.
The youngest.
They picked 2 guys with a September 2000 birthday. Yeah, the youngest, pardon me. 2 guys with a September 2000 birthday, and they picked one guy who was eligible last year in Blumel. He was a May 2000 birthday. The Russian goalie was in his fourth year of eligibility, which you wouldn't even see if he was on this side of the pond. And he very likely will be the oldest, or certainly in a very short list of the oldest prospects picked in this draft. And the other guy, yeah, is Lavoie, September 2000. And
He's
missing,
got to go back to junior though, does he? Does he not, Lavoie? Like he's
yeah,
only played 3 years
yes,
in the
yeah,
queue.
but they can't send him to the AHL
No,
because he's only got 1 year left because he's a late 2000. He'll be ready. He's like McLeod, very similar to McLeod, who had a similar kind of birthday. That 1 year junior, and he's ready to turn pro a year from now. And my bad, Daneshkin is December 2000, so he's only 6 months younger than or older than Broberg. But they did pick mature, bunch of late birthday guys or second or even fourth year eligible players, with Broberg being by far uh, the, the the youngster of the group.
those Bob Green's first draft, the Draisaitl draft or the McDavid draft?
Oh, I think the Leon draft. I mean,
Lagesson,
yeah, Green
Coghlan,
was.
Vessel.
Yeah, although he got promoted in 2015, so he was in the system, but he wasn't overseeing the system. Stu McGregor was still involved at that time, I do believe. Uh, boy,
So
I have
2015,
to
we're
give
we're
some
looking
hard
at.
thought.
We still got our
Yeah.
hopes on Caleb Jones, Ethan Bear, and Marino,
Hmm.
John Marino. So there's one guy with a real up arrow. That's Caleb Jones, and Bear and Marino are still prospects. And McDavid, of course, was taken. And then from the 2016 draft, Tyler Benson's got an up arrow. Looks like Philip Berglund kind of does. And then Jesse Puljujärvi is not looking good right now. Marcus Niemelainen not looking so good. So the 2016 draft not looking great, Bruce. 2017 draft, Yamamoto kind of a question mark. And then there's Stuart Skinner, Samorukov, Kirill Maximov, Ostap Safin, who's a big question mark. So a
Hmm.
few promising players there.
Safin, I mean, he signed a 3 year contract after a very promising last year, and then this year was just a total disaster for him. He
Sure
was never
was.
never healthy, barely played. I mean, he was with Halifax in the Memorial Cup. I mean, did we even see him play? I mean, he was just an afterthought. And he's signed to a 3 year contract, so he's going to be on that. He's going to be the next Braden Christopher on the 50-man list, possibly. But we'll see. Hopefully, he can overcome whatever it was that set him back. And
So here's my thing with the draft, Bruce, to say a draft's a success. You need, I say there's 11 key players on every NHL team.
mm-hmm.
There's one goalie, 4D, and 6 forwards, who are the backbone of your team, the absolute heart of your team. And every year in the draft, you must replace one of those players.
Yeah.
You must get one player. So because they've drafted so high, I think the Oilers are on track to do that in the Bob Green era drafts. With Draisaitl, McDavid, Tyler Benson, Caleb Jones could be one of those players. Samorukov could be one of those players. Yamamoto still has a chance. Skinner has a chance. Maximov has an outside chance. Evan Bouchard has a chance, good chance. McLeod has something of a chance. Broberg, of course, and Lavoie from this year's draft, and maybe even Konovalov. So we'll see.
Too soon to know, of course, on most
It
of them. I
is.
mean, we know 2013 produced Nurse, 14 produced Draisaitl, 15 produced McDavid, and after that, there's a bunch of question marks. We're hopeful, even with the Jesse Puljujärvi mess, hopeful that Tyler Benson will work out from 2016. And then after that, really all bets are off. You say one a year to replace somebody in those positions. Well, when you're picking as high as the Oilers are, it means they've got a bad team in the first place. They're hopefully upgrading in those
Yeah,
positions. And
that's
I personally buy into the Rich Winter version of the core group model, which includes a seventh forward, the 3C. So he has a 7-4-1 model with a dozen key players. And I
well, that's fair enough.
kind of
That
agree
works
that
for me.
3C is a key ingredient as well. Let's
So the
trade
Oilers
him
are
for Ryan Spooner.
about 6 players short of. They need
A
upgrades at
dozen.
about 6 of
Mm-hmm.
those spots. Half of the dozen.
Oh.
Yikes. Alrighty, Bruce. Let's well, any final thoughts? Any before we sign off here?
Just Holland basically stayed the course and kept his picks. Didn't pull off any trades of any description, and went a little bit out of the box with the Broberg pick, even though it was telegraphed for a week. And actually, if I have any concerns, it's at how that information got out there that the Oilers were so interested in the guy they ultimately wound up picking. That seemed like something leaked somewhere. That
Yeah, a little bit weird. I was hot about that last night. I'm just thinking about
Mhm.
like, does it really matter? I think it does though. So, like, they are pretty secretive about their lists and everything. Why not just publish your damn list if it's not a secret? So they don't do that, and so why would you leak that? So I do. There's
I don't know what
probably.
happened there, so it's a little problematic, but something they'll want to clean up. And for sure, I mean, at least they did go after skill at the forward position, and that's what one thing the organization desperately needs. So it's a ways off, but at least they're starting to address that weakness.
Yeah. Alrighty, yeah, and the Jesse Puljujarvi and Milan Lucic situations, Chris Russell, they all remain unresolved. There was no resolution at all, and it was interesting. We saw the value of cap space today, Bruce, with the
Sure did.
New Jersey Devils picking up PK Subban for basically nothing, draft picks.
For not quite nothing, but let's just say they didn't have to give up Leon Draisaitl, Oscar Klefbom, and the fourth overall pick to get him, as was proposed for the Oilers to grab Subban 3 years ago. So I mean,
He's
that
only got
$9 million contract at the time, you and I were fairly adamant that was just awfully rich, and it turns out now Nashville's trying to dump it so they can make room for somebody else.
I still like PK Subban.
Yeah, I
Of course.
love
And if
PK.
it was not just the contract, it was the price. The combination of the two
Yeah.
was like, oh geez, seriously? Like Draisaitl,
Mhm.
you're gonna go up. Anyway, but that New Jersey made I think a hell of a steal there. And I wish the Oilers had, if you just didn't have, a couple big contracts, that could have been the Oilers cashing in there. So it's always a good idea. And man, unless you are certain about a UFA, just don't lavish that money on that player. Like there's a few names floating out there like now, like Gustav Nyquist. And I'm just thinking, geez, and Brett Connolly. I'm thinking, like, we signed Benoit Pouliot. Like,
Yeah, exactly.
are you going to do the same with Connolly? Yeah. Anyway, I'm just not a big fan of the UFA route, really, in the end. And it can work at times. I think Andre Sekera really would have worked if he hadn't gotten hurt.
Well, but that's another risk
Yeah,
that
they're
you're
all
taking
older
with
players.
older players is that maybe they get a little bit more susceptible, a little longer coming back, and so even the Sekera contract, which in theory you can make a stronger defense for, in practice has turned out to be a cap sink for the Oilers for 2 years now.
And look what Toronto had to do to get rid of Marlowe's contract. They had to give up a first round draft pick, not a first overall pick, but a first round draft pick. And this because they were going to lose a young player like Kapanen or Johansson, and they still might. And Jake Gardner, like they're just up against it. And they
Just
had to
for
give up
1 year, 1 year of Marlowe. They had to get rid of 1 year of Marlowe. That cost them a first round pick. So now consider what it might cost to get rid of 4 years of Milan Lucic, and that'll give you pause.
Well, yeah, and Lucic has more value than Marlowe, but
Maybe
as a player,
1 year.
You're right. No, the Oilers are going to have to eat a bad contract, and I think they're going to have to do it because I think you have to move. But again, they don't have to move them now. They can move them next summer, but they do have to move them sooner or later because they can't have them be forced to protect him in the expansion draft. Okay, let's leave it there, Bruce. We're venturing off here.
We're kind of rambling on, and anyway, lots of actually fairly slow weekend. There was no trades of any players at all yesterday, but 2 or 3 interesting ones today. But I'd say pretty quiet overall, especially for all the pre-draft hype about all the talks that were supposedly going on.
hard to move contracts right now. That's what we're seeing. We're seeing an NHL which is bogged down at the cap. It's like trench warfare here right now. You can't do anything, and if you send your guys out and they're getting they get like there's nothing you can do. I don't want to make a war.
And with due respect to the management that's out there, if the league would tell them what the bloody cap is, maybe they could do something. I mean, it's ridiculous. They've gone through the draft and nobody knows what the cap's going to be next year. And it's gone from all year they were saying 83 million, and then last week they're saying 82 or maybe 81 and a half. And then yesterday I heard, well, maybe only 80. And whoa, well, that's a little margin there. That's all a lot of these teams have to deal with, is that margin. So get the information straight and get it out there, NHL. Come on.
All righty. Thanks for talking, Bruce.
Thanks for listening, everyone.
And in the meantime and in between times, this has been another edition of the Cult of Hockey podcast.